Right, hello everybody. So I'm going to change the pace a little bit and not talk about the actual farming side. I'm going to talk about the people side. And the insights into what our project found. But first, this was a very big team that dwindled away to just about me now. So I just wanted to acknowledge the team that was involved. And more than the team, there was lots of people, and some of them are in the room that were also involved. So the project was the NESP 2.1.3, I think. It's the, hang on, I have to go back actually, because I can't remember the long titles. Somewhere. Well, maybe it's forward, I don't know, but it's got a very long title as well, and it's about behaviour change in farmers. So we know that adoption of best management practices was low, and so we looked at why we thought this was, and so we involved farmers and natural resource management groups to work out what influences behaviour change in decision making. So we hoped that we would encourage best management practice uptake amongst land managers that had particularly not engaged before. And this is one of the things that we didn't really explicitly achieve, but we got lots of off-the-record information around that, so we hope to be able to use those insights. And the project really was around using the insights of social marketing behaviour change to implement changes in the marketing and engagement of water quality projects. So that was the crux of it. The little segue down the bottom there is that when we went through our literature review, the literature really told us that some of the problem or some of the issues around it was around readability and not being able to understand that conversation between the science and the farmer, which I think, 4 or 5 years on now is actually, there's a huge amount of improvement there. So it's really pleasing. So the methodology was really around partnering with our NRM groups and using their membership databases to talk to graziers and cane farmers in the wet and dry tropics. We designed a questionnaire with those teams on board, and we took it out to industry and had lots of feedback. That took about 5 months before we developed a questionnaire that could go out. We had some limitations. The collection was delayed. There was a bit of mistrust around not sharing the data with the government, so that kind of slowed that process down until we worked out a resolution. And there was lots of there was 2 different types of collection agents between the 2 NRMs that were involved. So really our first area that I'd like to talk about is that the people that are involved in using the outputs of this study have changed the way that they do things around from the insights of this study. Okay, so if I just pop to the desktop review for a minute, what we did was we looked at 53 different documents from a range of NRMs in the region, and we looked at how readable they were. And we measured that through the salience of the messages, the framing, the tone, use of visual imagery, and the cognitive limitations around that. And we did this using 2 programs, so the Reef program in the Burdekin and the wet tropics, and then the Reef Trust tender in the Burdekin. So we used a smog readability test to do this, and that's a simple measure of gobbledygook. And as silly as it sounds, it is the gold standard of readability testing. So when you want to measure how something's readable, then you do use this test. And so to do that, you take 30 sentences and I have to read my notes, you take all the 3 or more syllable words within the selected sentences and count the square root, and then you calculate that and you round it to a nearest integer and you add 3. And then that gives you the age or the year level of readability. So we aim for years 7 to 9, and this is important because one of the findings from this research will pop up later and made a huge change, or it might help to maybe a little bit explain. I like to think it helps to explain a little bit about some of the conversations that are going on. So we found that all of the data was written well above the readable level. So grade 18 there for the Reef Trust in the Vertican. This is a document, this is a marketing material about it. So this is your fact sheets or your information sheets or your community notices, whatever it is that went out. So grade 18 is around undergraduate level university education, and these are the marketing materials that went to farmers. Okay, so you can see that it's quite a high readability. The other thing we tested was visual imagery, and I put those two pictures up there because the person who was coding the data said, oh my gosh, they use so much fertiliser. And I said, actually, that picture's about the fertiliser bag recycling plant, which is part of, fixing the problem. So it was really important that that photo was acknowledged, that it was really taken out of context in terms of how fertilisers are being managed, even down to recycling their bags. So that was quite interesting, we thought. We looked at framing norms and message tone. So the information was mostly positive, used injunctive and descriptive norms quite well, but they were quite dictatorial and sometimes patronising, and this comes into play with the age group of the text writing. It's really hard because the notes are behind the thing. So if we look at impact, so the NRMs really took this on board, and this is not a direct change. There's the two documents that I could find that kind of indicated what I was saying. So they took their fact sheets, we put them through the SMOG, we looked at the readability, the imagery, the space between all the writing, and we had a conversation about how to make them more readable. And so we changed from plain paper documents into much more visually attractive documents. The brochures were different, the wording was different, and I'll give some examples of the wording in a minute. Maybe. This is the part of the impact that, this is a really important finding. So when I went to have a look at why the language was different in different areas, I looked at the government writing guidelines, so the government's readability guidelines, and then their style manual. And when I went to the style manual in 2016, it said that, that people should write for their audience at age 9. So that's grade 3 or 4. So if you're talking to someone like they're 9 years old, you potentially could be quite patronising to them. And so this was really influential in the writing, and we talked a lot to the government agencies who helped with this project. But it did take until 2021 for them to change that guidelines. So 2016 I pointed it out, 2021 I looked, maybe end of last year, hadn't changed, and when I looked ready for this presentation it had changed, and now they're aiming their readability or their language back to the correct age, so year 7 or between 12 and 14 years old. So that was quite interesting to see. So the second round of data, we looked at so the first round of data was to set a baseline, the second round of data was to implement something, and then the third round of data was to measure it. And because there is so much going on in this space, we couldn't find an intervention that we could simply measure as one. And so these are just some of the examples of some of the projects that were going on at the time. So you can see there's lots of projects in this space. So you can't say, well, actually it was Cane Changer that did it, or it was the Smart Cane BMP, or it was Project Nemo. All of them will have had an influence. So to try and get that change measurement, we went out to all of the projects in the area and we asked them to feed back to us if they had used the NESP 2.1.3 or the readability study, the 3.1.3, in the work that they were doing. And these are some of the comments that came back. So there was a great impact, especially in the NRMs, in how they wrote things and how they displayed things and how they presented their marketing materials to their audiences. And then that flowed into, for example, in Laura's project, into her project design. So we were really pleased to see that they were really, we had lots of meetings with these people, so we knew we knew they were using it, but it was really nice to have the support that they were using it. So second round of data also asked, so we had a few hiccups with data collection, so we decided we'd ask the extension officers what they thought that farmers thought around the questions that we were asking in our survey. And I'm not going to go through all of these because I haven't got time, but you can see just in that top one there, which is how important are the listed statements to land managers when making decisions about what to do on their farm. So the top score is extension officers thought that maintaining physical health and mental health of a family was, only 11% thought that that was really important, where 71% of farmers thought that was important. And so there's this little pattern that goes through this data that kind of says that, extension officers aren't really understanding their audience, but we don't think that's the case. This was the tip of the iceberg, and we thought that these were really important questions that we can ask. And you can see that there is a pattern throughout that data where there is some mismatch there. All right, and that's a third one. Oops, and a fourth one. Okay, so the impact here, we did lots of talking around how we might think about how we address farmers in different environments, and there was a beautiful study done on personality traits of cattle farmers actually in around Gladstone area. And they identified these personality styles, and we did a little bit more research, and then we identified that the best way to train these people or to talk to these people might be using this type of strategy, the strategy down the bottom. So this is a work in progress. I've had lots of conversations with terrain staff around what this data means, and we have some disagreement and agreement around the extension officers' impressions of what farmers think. So nothing's set in concrete, and the people that I'm talking with, I'm not naming names because there's some have moved on and some haven't, and there's lots of people in this space. They are very happy to have this conversation and said that some of the things in there were actually quite true. So some of that data that was really conflicting was actually quite eye-opening to them, and so they were quite happy to proceed with that. And we like to think that we could grab some funding somewhere along the way to dig deeper into that, because we need to support our extension officers in the work that they do to help, obviously solve these issues. So the third round of data, basically overall the land managers in both regions, when we asked about fertiliser rates, we asked about education and project funding, and we asked about sediment runoff. So land managers in both regions have changed. From the year 1 to year 3, there was an incremental a positive change for how they used fertiliser, which supports the evidence today. Wet tropics land managers have a high agreement towards their industry's role in the declining health of Great Barrier Reef. And dry tropics are not sure that loss from their properties affects the reef, but they do acknowledge that cane growing plays some role in the declining. So these are the farmers' responses. So they're not really sure around. And now that this was taken in 2017/18, so again, I acknowledge lots has changed, even just in that short period of time. Both regions tend to shift the blame to other organisations, industries and individuals rather than consider their own practices as adding pressure to the Great Barrier Reef. And the grazier results are just a little less clear, because graziers were only interviewed in the dry tropics, so obviously the cane farmers are going to have a larger sample, so a little bit more work needs to be done with graziers there. So just a quick couple of slides on other impact. We've done lots of presentations. We talk about this all the time, as many times as we can. We've got a few publications out around it. I organised some better connected workshops around beliefs and biases based on the extension officer data, and they've gone down really well, and I've presented those in Mackay and in Western Australia. And this project is the foundation, or one of the foundation researchers for the Human Dimensions Office of the Great Barrier Reef funding that's out and about at the moment, and I'm working on 2 of those projects with teams there. And that's me. Thank you.